I'd next like to call on Carolyn Choi, Vice President, Energy Environmental Policy for Southern California Edison, to give us the utility point of view.
Okay, well, thank you, and thank you so much for this hearing this afternoon. I think SCE has certainly been supportive of taking action on carbon and air quality. We definitely think that the issue does have to consider customer perspective as well as the role of the utility in the reliable, affordable service and safe service to our customers. So I think one of the things that we have here in this table is that it's our interaction with the retail customer. So they certainly are depending upon us for 24/7 service, the power quality that Michael discussed, particularly as we see more and more digitalization of the economy, that power quality becomes that much more essential to a strong economy. Now, our electric power industry is certainly going through a major transformation, and I think you're all aware of that. So the changes that we see coming in the next 10 years, we see much more than the last 100 years. And we are right now, I think, in the middle of that transformation here in California. So I brought this chart because it does show that we have made significant progress on our emissions. We're on track to hit the 20% below. Well, we're going to hit 1990 levels, we think, by 2020. And then you can see in 2030, it's the 40% below target. And it shows how important electrification is going to be to hit California's greenhouse gas goals, particularly as you think about not just clean electricity, but then the transformation of the transportation sector and electricity playing a very key role in that as well. So making the changes really have to not just be a theoretical exercise, because this endeavor, it's going to be a significant environmental challenge, it's an energy challenge, but it has to be done in the context of the essential nature that electricity plays both to our customers' everyday lives, the economy, customer price impact, system reliability, and then the safety of our employees and the public. We also believe that while we are on track to achieve the goals, what we are going to be using to get us to the 2020 target cannot be the same tools that get us to 2030. And so you heard earlier just that need for flexibility, and we really encourage that. We are also very supportive of an integrated approach, one that does look at energy efficiency, renewables, even the electrification of the transport sector altogether, so that the utilities, when we have a target, we're presuming that we will get a target going forward post-2020, and that we could put together a comprehensive plan rather than a siloed approach across each of the different tools that we utilize today. The regional approach we definitely support. We continue to believe that regional markets can capture efficiencies and also integrate diverse renewable resources. The EPA Clean Power Plan that was just released recently, we believe, could also be another driver for regional cooperation, not just in energy markets, but even in our cap and trade market. Operational challenges were certainly noted earlier, and we believe that as technological innovations bring new products and services to the market, and as we experience greater renewables, there's a need to have really good insight into the system. So today, we don't really have tools that let us have great insight, particularly on what's happening behind the meter. And as more and more distributed energy resources come onto the grid, we are averaging right now about 5,000 applications per month for net energy metering. So we're seeing a lot of our customers adopting DG. It's fantastic. But when that happens and we can't see what's actually happening to those technologies behind the meter. So that real-time view of the power supply and net load of customers, that will allow the utility and the ISO to plan for meeting customer needs at the wholesale and distribution level. It also allows the utility and the CAISO to optimize those resources to maintain both grid reliability and power quality, including the diversity of resources, both the generation type as well as geographical diversity. And I won't speak on this, but we're certainly, as I said, we believe the integrated approach with transportation electrification and energy efficiency really is important, and then needing that flexibility across all of our programs. You talked about the customer who doesn't utilize their electric furnace during the day today because the way the rate design works, they are penalized for it, and it's better for them in their current rate design to operate that furnace at night. There are certainly times of the year, as we think about this overgen, where that makes sense for them to operate during the day. And so all these new programs, the the tariff design, rate design are going to have to become more flexible as we think about more renewables coming onto the system and the times of the year when we're going to have more overgen than at other times of the year. So just in summary, we support moving forward on all these greenhouse gas initiatives. We recognize the important role that renewable energy plays, both in the economy and in our efforts to address the greenhouse gas goals, as well as transportation electrification and energy efficiency. We believe all resources should count to take action, including distributed energy resources. Now, there's a lot of discussion today about whether that should count in any type of mandatory program, but our customers are paying for that power, and we believe that, therefore, that power should count towards any kind of mandatory programs. And ultimately, that convergence of the technological innovation and the state's climate goals make it clear that we have to work in a collaborative way and that regional approaches make a lot of sense. So thank you. Look forward to questions.
All right. That was excellent. Thank you, and thank you for being on time. So I think we'd like to hear last from the Northern California, the Balancing Authority of Northern California. You can perhaps be the summer up. And we could hear from Gavin Purchase, Environmental Defense Fund, next, and then after that, Carl Zucella.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Jim Shetler with the Balancing Authority of Northern California. I'm here representing.
No, we're going to hear you last.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You can be the summary guy, and then we'll hear from Carl and Gavin first. So whichever one of you prefers to go next.
All right, I will kick it off.
Go ahead.
I'm going to do so with the help of my 7-year-old nephew's science fair project. What you see behind us here.
So this is Gavin. How do you pronounce your last name?
Purchase.
Purchase.
As in to buy.
Director of California Clean Energy Environmental Defense Fund.
Yeah, that's right. So what you see here is a replica of a typical California house. Solar panels on the roof, a Tesla power wall, a Tesla car, and less than 300 feet of actual living space in which to do anything.
He must be doing very well.
Right. So I only want to make 3 points that essentially are extra tools that can be used in what people refer to as the silver buckshot approach to balancing the system when you have higher penetration rates of renewables. Those 3 points are going to be the use of tariffs in tariff design, demand response, including storage, and electric vehicles. And I will hopefully do so in less than 5 minutes. Tariffs is an important one because essentially the tariff structure at the moment, and I'm focusing on the residential rate structure at the moment, is a tiered structure which can incentivize reductions in energy efficiency, but it doesn't incentivize people to use electricity at different times of the day. Following a PUC decision, I think at the beginning of July, we are aiming to have pilots for time of use pricing running between now and 2019, at which point consumers will be put onto a time of use rate. That time of use rate essentially could be considered as a kind of currency for a new developing market. And what I mean by that is once you have that rate in place, providers such as Nest or others with programmable devices can come forward to utilize that rate structure to sell devices that allow the home to become more automated and responsive to those price indicators. That could lead to a significant shift, essentially, of demand away from the evening peak and into the middle of the day. So a perfect example of that would be assuming that, yeah, there we go. You could pre-cool your house during the day, and by the time you get home at 6 or 7, there is no need to run your air conditioning unit because it's been running through the day and your house is already cold. Similarly, if in the wintertime, you could heat your home during the day and come home and have less electricity demand during that period. The point here really is to maintain an eye on how the pilots develop and ensure that they provide the best signal to the customer with enough education and outreach so that consumers know that this is happening and how to respond to it. and then to allow for the market to develop afterwards. The next item, I said, was demand response. Essentially, we could consider that just being turning things off, which doesn't happen. No, it does. What we see here is essentially a very nascent market in California, whereas we are leading the way in terms of renewable development. We are not in terms of demand response market development. There is, I think, very small amounts of demand response that are available to ISO that can be used to mitigate a ramp, for example. One of the ways of one of the obstacles there is essentially monetization for those kind of projects. Specifically, the way they get paid at the moment is through resource adequacy payments, and in the future, potentially through a demand response auction mechanism. Both of those are very small-scale payments that need to be looked at in terms of how you incentivize this at larger scales. And that goes especially for storage. I think all of the utilities would say that they're financing the revenue streams for the storage project are hindered by the definition of resource adequacy, something that has to run for 4 hours on consecutively over 3 consecutive days. That, by and large, rules out a number of storage technologies. If that was adjusted, you could see payments going to storage that would help to bring down the cost even further. The last is electric vehicles, represented here by a BMW i8, I think. Don't know if it's what it's like to drive, but it looks good. Essentially, what we're seeing here is, again, a nascent market in terms of EV car deployment that is by and large being hindered by range anxiety, is the top item that comes up. There is currently proposals from each of the IOUs to build out charging stations across California to deal with that issue. EDF is very supportive of those initiatives and hope to see them go forward in the immediate term, if not in the longer term. So I'm going to shut it off there with those 3 points: tariff design, DR, electric vehicles.
Okay. So what was the last one again? It's
electric vehicles.
Electric vehicles, which is, in a sense, demand response as well.
In a sense, yeah.
Okay. So Carl, Director of Western Transmission, Natural Resources Defense Council, and you pronounce your last name?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, my last name is pronounced Zakella.
Zakella.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk with you today. As is always the case when you're getting towards the end of a hearing like this, quite a lot of what I was going to say has been said by others, so I will try not to repeat. I'm going to focus my remarks today very much on regional coordination and its value to us in meeting our carbon goals and reducing the cost of our renewable integration goals. Thank you very much. First, we'll talk a little bit about obstacles for renewable integration in the West, the need for regional coordination, benefits that we can get from this, and how markets can optimize the use of the grid in terms of reducing costs and getting more renewables into the system. Obstacles primarily begin with the way the grid is constructed and operated. There's a great deal of balkanization in the electricity system in the West that prohibits us or limits our ability to exploit geographic diversity in the system. We heard a lot about that from previous speakers about how the wind is blowing in one place when it's not blowing in another, that kind of thing. It also leads to a lot of inefficient use of transmission, which both drives up costs and increase carbon emissions by something I refer to as artificial congestion, which is contracted use of lines which aren't always exercised. But you can't always get at that, and I think Phil spoke earlier also about how the day-ahead market can provide somewhat of a remedy for that. It also causes us to build unnecessary flexibility reserves and causes to drive up the cost of renewable energy integration. On the left-hand side of this is what's the Western grid, the WEC footprint. And if you look, it's like one big machine that should be running the western United States, and in fact does, and a little bit of Mexico and quite a big chunk of Canada. But this is what it actually looks like. These are the 38 balancing area authorities that we recently had. As Phil mentioned, there's now a 39th, each of them having to operate their parts of the grid independently. And it's no way to run a railroad. If you want to be efficient in the use of the resources that you have and the transmission that you have, you can't have everybody building duplicative generation, duplicative flexibility reserves, and duplicative transmission. In fact, there's quite a body of evolution of data on how to move forward here. A lot of agreement across a lot of different players about how to revolutionize the operation of the grid. One thing that's not on here I'd call your attention to is the Department of Energy's Electricity Advisory Committee released a paper last September on modernizing the grid, and you'll see many of these same themes repeated throughout these various studies. This is actually one of them represented here, the Low Carbon Grid Study. That's a National Renewable Energy Lab study, and it is quite in agreement with many of the others. I'm not going to read this to you, but I do want to point out what this does show is on the left-hand side of the chart are hours, across the top are months. This is the variability in the system that we see seasonally and during the hours of the day within these seasons. And you could see how geographic diversity would really help us to fill this in and allow us to get value from the resources that we have to curtail now because we cannot export them efficiently given this balkanized, inefficient system that we have. We get regional markets in here. We can blend different resources, balancing our portfolio more fully, getting value out of the resources that we have when we're in surplus, but also notice that our neighboring states and regions also have surplus times. That's low-cost power, very low-cost power for our industries, for our ratepayers. And that's something I think that this is a study that was done for the Western Electricity Coordinating Council by E3 about flexibility needs in the West. And it really, I think, tells an important story about the value of regional coordination. Now, I'm just have these up here because a lot of these studies, this is a different NREL study, the Renewable Electricity Future Study done in 2012. Many of these things really reinforce each other. Common threads in these are really all about increased coordination and market coordination, using forecasting tools, but primarily looking at the things that we are doing wrong and how we can reverse those. Getting rid of the balkanization in the system, being able to more freely trade resources across the region. I'm not going to dwell on this one. This just illustrates something that Carolyn spoke about in terms of having a balanced portfolio. Phil also spoke about this. Storage plays many different kinds of roles. I think we start to get used to talking about storage as being a thing when really it provides many different services. And there are different types of storage that can provide those services, from voltage regulation to load following, filling in behind the peaks and valleys of renewable generation. And there are different tools for this, some that can come online in milliseconds and others that may take a little longer. They all respond very quickly, but they have different characteristics with different values that we can actually address. Some of the benefits that we've talked about, very fast reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. When we have surplus energy and we're in an energy market, it's a low-cost energy that's always dispatched first. In those kinds of markets, renewable energy, because it has zero or very low marginal costs, will always be dispatched first. You won't be able to compete with renewable energy resources.
Could you finish in about a minute?
Yes, I can. I'm almost done. And in other markets, coal plants have been and nuclear plants have been sidelined because they cannot meet their operating costs through the market, and we've seen them very quickly begin to retire. I will stop there. This is a separate little section I wanted to add, if we had some time, about how planning and transmission planning can really help us look more regionally. We have some things in play here in California, like the Renewable Energy Transmission Initiative, version 2.0, that was announced last week. That gives us tools, Order 1000 through FERC and WEC transmission planning, to look region-wide with neighboring entities to try to find these efficiencies. NRDC very much supports the efforts of Cal ISO to expand to a day-ahead market, beginning with PacifiCorp, in the hopes that we can do much more with the resources and the transmission we have in the western United States to meet our carbon and renewable energy resource goals.